Well, I've always wondered how long it would take for me to make a Star Wars video, and it looks like that day has finally come. Hopefully I won't get, stabbed in my sleep or something for even mentioning Star Wars on the internet, but c'est la vie. Anywho, let's get to what you came to see. The Mandalorian. Perhaps the saving grace for Disney-era Star Wars, or maybe it's just a fluke. Who knows? But I'm not here to talk about that. And you're not here to listen to me talk about that. I'm here to talk about something specifically in the show that really surprised me. The music. Ludwig Göransson, this guy right here, kind of looks like a Swedish Jesus type of deal. He's the mastermind behind all of the music in the show. Recently coming off of winning an Oscar for his work on Black Panther, and having worked extensively as a producer with acts like Childish, Gambino, and Haim, Göransson seemed like a fully qualified candidate to be a composer, but not an obvious one for Star Wars at least. I say this because a lot of his work is rooted in hip-hop and not grandiose orchestrations like one would typically connect with Star Wars. At the same time, though, there isn't really ever an obvious candidate to fill the shoes of the John Williams. But that's what Disney has had to do with its handful of latest projects, including Rogue One, scored by Michael Giacchino, and Solo, scored mostly by John Powell and a little bit of help by, John Williams, stupid. And honestly, after watching the show, I think that Göransson's compositions for The Mandalorian resulted not only in an excellent and cohesive collection of pieces, but it also gave Star Wars something that it drastically needed: change. In a recent video made by Nerdstalgic, he discusses how intertextuality, or the shaping of one piece of media from another, has run rampant among many of Disney's films, and Star Wars is no exception to this. Except while he focused more on how characters, objects, or moments are revived for the sake of fan service, I think it's fair to say that this idea can also be applied and expanded to the music of Star Wars as well. Like Nerdstalgic says, intertextuality on its own isn't a bad thing, and intertextuality between film scores of a certain franchise is pretty necessary for musical cohesion. But before I go on to say why, I need to explain what exactly defines a Star Wars score. Of course, there's expressive orchestral pieces inspired by the style of romantic period composers, but the most fundamental building block of a Star Wars score is the leitmotif. Watch Sideways' video for a better explanation of this, but essentially a leitmotif is a musical phrase that represents a character, place, or idea that repeats throughout, in this instance, a film score. And considering that you clicked on this video, you probably already recognize most of the main Star Wars leitmotifs. The Rebel fanfare, the Force theme, Leia's theme, the Imperial March, etc., etc., etc. And these motifs can evolve throughout the film to signify some sort of change in the person or idea that it represents. Anyways, leitmotifs and larger themes are also handy because they provide a sense of thematic cohesion and emotional dynamic among a group of films, hence why they relate to this idea of intertextuality. But they can also be abused if they're relied on too much. For those who have seen The Rise of Skywalker, I think this movie is perhaps one of the greatest offenders of this. The soundtrack felt like a collection of greatest hits rather than a culmination of all these motifs, but there are plenty of other cases of this as well. In Solo, for example, I felt that using the music from the asteroid field in Empire when they're doing the Kessel Run was a little cheap, and the same thing in The Last Jedi when they use the Into the Death Star music from Return of the Jedi when they're going through the cave things on Crete. But I suppose these are the risks that you take when you try to create a musical canon for a franchise as big as Star Wars. And then there's another problem. The music of Star Wars has become limited creatively. What I mean by this is that in all Star Wars films and TV shows and video games, with limited exceptions, the scores rely solely on the style that John Williams has essentially codified. An orchestra, maybe a choir, the motifs from the original trilogy, then maybe, I don't know, a couple new motifs or something. This is the strategy that Giacchino and Powell adopted for their own respective scores, and while they are certainly good scores on their own, these constraints that they've put on themselves make each score less distinct from one another in the grander scheme. And this is especially the case as more Star Wars media has come out. But then, enter Ludwig Göransson. After watching The Mandalorian, it should be pretty obvious that Göransson's score deviates extremely from the norm. After all, like I said before, with a few limited exceptions, almost all music in Star Wars, they don't take too many risks with respect to instrumentation, composition, or arrangement, something that Göransson turns on its head. I think that Göransson's score is the perfect synthesis of several varying styles of film scoring. Of course, obviously, it's a Star Wars TV show, so you're probably going to have Williams' influences there, which there certainly are, but it also extends beyond that, incorporating stylistic features of both Western films and other science fiction films. Essentially, distill John Williams, Ennio Morricone, and Vangelis into one soundtrack, and you get The Mandalorian. And it's honestly just so refreshing and fun to hear music that still captures the adventure of Star Wars, but using completely different and sometimes unorthodox instrumentation. Like, never in 1,000 years would I ever imagine that a piece of Star Wars media would use a freaking trap beat over its opening theme, and never in 1,000,000,000 years would I ever expect to not only tolerate it, but really like it. It makes you feel like you're getting a drastically different perspective of the Star Wars universe and not just a surface-level change in scenery. The other interesting choice that Göransson makes is that, to my surprise, all of the typical Star Wars leitmotifs we all know and love are notably absent from the score. No Rebel fanfare, no Force theme, no Imperial March. But Göransson does not forego leitmotifs and themes altogether, obviously. We still got that for The Mandalorian. We got that for the Imperial Remnant. We got that for IG-11. And we got that for Baby Yoda. In an interview, Göransson even says that there are themes upon themes written into the score of The Mandalorian. And the ones I just played for y'all are just some of the obvious ones. So what exactly do all of these choices amount to? Why am I taking the time to explain how stylistically different The Mandalorian's score is? Well, by composing the score for the TV show in such a way, Göransson divorces the story of The Mandalorian from the rest of the Skywalker saga. It feels like a story that can stand on its own without needing nostalgia bait to prop it up. It demonstrates that Star Wars not only needs to change, but that it can change. And for a franchise that has somehow begun to feel creatively exhausted, The Mandalorian is a spark of hope and, hopefully, a sign that Star Wars can and will grow in the Disney era. This has been 1C2, and I have spoken.